Welcome back, and thanks for tuning to Reddit Cheating Stories. Let's dive in. David and Sarah had been married for 7 years. They were high school sweethearts who had grown up together, exploring the small town where they lived. They had always been meant to be, or so it seemed. Their marriage had been a happy one, filled with laughter, adventure, and a deep love for each other. They had built a beautiful home, started successful careers, and were surrounded by loving friends and family. But on that fateful Sunday, everything changed. Sarah sent David a text message that made his heart skip a beat. "We need to talk," it said. David's mind began to racing. What could be wrong? Had something happened to one of their families? Was Sarah okay? He tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on the task at hand, mowing the lawn. But his mind kept wandering back to the message. When Sarah came home, she looked pale and scared. David's heart sank. He knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" David asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah took a deep breath. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I slept with someone else." David felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The room began to spin, and he thought he might pass out. "Who?" David managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, tears streaming down her face. "It was Mark," she said, her voice barely audible. Mark. David's mind reeled. Mark was Sarah's high school sweetheart, the one she had dated before David. They had remained friends over the years, but David had always felt a twinge of jealousy whenever Mark was around. David's anger and hurt boiled over. "How could you?" he shouted, slamming his fist on the counter. "How could you do this to me, to us?" Sarah crumpled to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. David stood over her, his heart heavy with pain and anger. The argument that followed was intense and emotional. David and Sarah both said things they would later regret, hurtful words that cut deep. As the night wore on, David's anger began to fade, replaced by a deep sadness. He realized that he didn't know if he could ever forgive Sarah, if he could ever trust her again. The days that followed were dark and difficult. David and Sarah barely spoke to each other, their conversations stilted and awkward. David threw himself into his work, trying to distract himself from the pain. But nothing seemed to work. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the feeling that his whole world had been turned upside down. Sarah, on the other hand, was desperate to save their marriage. She sent David letters and messages, begging him to forgive her. "I love you, David," she wrote. "I always have, and I always will. I know I made a mistake, but I promise to do whatever it takes to make it right." David was torn. A part of him wanted to forgive Sarah, to move forward and rebuild their marriage. But another part of him was hesitant, unsure if he could ever trust her again. As the weeks turned into months, David and Sarah's relationship remained stagnant. They were stuck in a state of limbo, unsure of what the future held. It wasn't until David received a letter from Sarah, a letter that poured out her heart and soul, that he began to see things differently. In the letter, Sarah explained how she had been feeling lonely and unappreciated, how she had been struggling to find meaning in her life. She wrote about how she had turned to Mark, seeking comfort and validation. But she also wrote about how she had realized her mistake, how she had come to understand that she had hurt David deeply. She promised to do whatever it took to regain his trust, to rebuild their marriage. David read the letter, tears streaming down his face. For the first time, he began to understand Sarah's perspective, to see things from her point of view. He realized that Sarah wasn't a monster, that she was a flawed and imperfect human being who had made a mistake. He began to see that their marriage was worth fighting for, that their love was stronger than any mistake. With a newfound sense of hope and determination, David decided to meet with Sarah. They sat down together, holding hands, and began to talk. Their conversation was raw and emotional, but it was also honest and authentic. They talked about their feelings, their fears, and their dreams. As they spoke, David felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. He felt a sense of forgiveness, a sense of understanding. "I love you, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I love you too, David," she replied, tears streaming down her face. Their hug was long and tight, a hug that spoke of forgiveness, of healing and of a love that had been tested and proven true. As they hugged, David felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that their marriage was far from perfect, but he also knew that it was worth fighting for. Over the next few weeks, David and Sarah worked tirelessly to rebuild their relationship. They went to therapy, they had long conversations, and they made a conscious effort to reconnect. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, still moments of anger and hurt. But they were determined to move forward, to create a brighter future for themselves. One day, as they were walking through the park, David turned to Sarah and said, "I'm glad we're doing this." "Doing what?" Sarah asked, looking up at him with a smile. "Rebuilding our marriage," David replied. "I know it's not easy, but I feel like we're making progress." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "I feel it too," she said. "I feel like we're finally healing." David took her hand, feeling a sense of gratitude and love. "I'm glad we're in this together," he said. As they walked, hand in hand, David knew that their marriage was stronger than ever. They had faced their challenges head-on, and they had come out on top. Their love story was far from over, but David knew that it would continue to be a beautiful one. A story of forgiveness, of healing, and of a love that had conquered all. As the months went by, David and Sarah's relationship continued to grow stronger. They learned to communicate more effectively, to listen to each other, and to forgive each other. They started to do things together again, like going on dates, trying new restaurants, and taking weekend trips. They laughed together, they cried together, and they built a deeper connection. David realized that he had taken Sarah for granted, that he had assumed she would always be there. But now, he appreciated her more than ever. He appreciated her kindness, her compassion, and her love. Sarah, too, had learned to appreciate David. She had learned to see him in a new light, to appreciate his strengths and his weaknesses. She had learned to forgive him, to understand him, and to love him more deeply. Together, they had built a stronger, more resilient marriage. They had weathered the storm, and they had come out on top. One day, as they were sitting on their porch, watching the sunset, David turned to Sarah and said, "I'm so grateful for you." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm grateful for you too," she said. David took her hand, feeling a sense of love and appreciation. "I promise to always cherish you, to always support you, and to always love you," he said. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I promise the same," she said. As the sun dipped below the horizon, David and Sarah sat together, holding hands, and watching the stars come out. They knew that their love would continue to shine bright, a beacon of hope and forgiveness in a world that often seemed dark and unforgiving. And as they sat there, surrounded by the beauty of nature, David knew that their love story was one for the ages. A story of forgiveness, of healing, and of a love that had conquered all. And hey, if you love dramatic stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this lesson, because some bridges are meant to be burned. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.